Well, thanks to Inga's support and Peter's involvement, it's been a long-term project, and and there have been developments, such as the former butcher shop next door, and but I think I would like to see maybe another generation of artists being engaged, not without mine, but with my generation. The collection represents a few different moments in artistic practice, so it's good. But I hope that we can continue to add artists. That we'd have to do it in a hurry, but I think slowly and steadily. Yes, Mr. Gutman. Professor Dr. Gutman, what?
You were saying something. I mean, the question is, when, from your point of view, when did you start confronting the issue of postmodernism? Because this was kind of interesting. You were saying something like that it actually anything that came after Jasper Jones, from your point of view.
Yeah, I put my second show, Castelli, which the first one wasn't in that room, but that one was. I was disturbed. I mean, I've seen all my cultural heroes, all the artists I respected, showing in that room, and from the moment I got in New York to a couple of years before. But I realized that there was something. The room was full of ghosts. And that whatever you do there was as problematic as working with a canvas, almost. And so I had to put a disclaimer up on the wall. This is 1971. And I put a disclaimer up on the wall, which talked about the different kinds of contexts that one could see the installation I did, and arriving at calling it postmodern, because I did not want it to be seen as part of all that had happened in that room before, right? And whether that was the first time somebody called postmodern or not, I don't know. But for me it was important because I was drawing a line between what had preceded and what I was trying to do, to make clear what I was trying to do. I don't know. Do we really need this?
Although from the point of view of the early folk, like Rauschenberg and Jones, what they were doing was postmodern from the point of view of...
Of course. Yeah, and Warhol and, a lot that had gone on in there, true. But the line was continuing back, and part of the reason had to do with the institution of Leo Castelli Gallery itself. It was arguably the best art gallery in the world in a sense, in terms of the artists that were being represented there and stuff. So, but that was authority, and I was interested in questioning authority. So I already felt a little simultaneously honored and compromised by being there. I managed to overcome my sense of feeling compromised, fortunately, but it was very strong then. It wasn't that long from '68, and and also I was the youngest artist in the history of the gallery, and remained so. But it was a very strange. It was a bit overwhelming, really, in a way, but it was material to work with at the same time.
Just another short follow-up. So, from your point of view, I mean, Greenberg and Freud, these guys were they were forces that were basically against pop art.
They were forces that were against, they were totally in a prescriptive mode of what art could be. Greenberg, very, very clear.
This was like 65, 66, right?
Yeah.
A
lot of things were going on at once. I mean, also you had Judd and Morris and minimal, that was happening, but not in a very high visible way, but it was definitely still in the conversation, right? And yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw that finger. I didn't know what it meant.
But you always felt in alliance with Warhol.
Well, this is a very difficult and awkward thing, because I was really more interested in what, like, Judd was saying and, the minimalists. But the truth was, and I kept it a secret a long time, I was really strongly supported by the pop artists. And that was extremely perplexing, when, after Andy died, Leo called me and said, Andy's dead and I have to tell you something. What? So we go to lunch, and he said, well, for the last 25 years, Andy's been buying your work anonymously from the gallery and donating it anonymously to museums around the world. Of course, I didn't know that, and I'm not responsible, and thank you, Andy, but still, it was quite shocking to learn this. And also Roy and Klaus Oldenburg. But frankly, I was a little bit embarrassed by the support. It didn't seem to be intellectually rigorous on one level. Although, certainly Warhol's use of the silkscreen was a real anti-painting gesture. We know now how anti-painting it is when you look at the prices in the market, but because it has those prices because it happens to be on a canvas. Their market is that dumb, but it is, and it's conservative force, and it rolls along, and it frames work, and artists have to be very strong to fight for the meaning of their work. And if you let a critic or you let your prices or something else define your work, you're losing what it is to be an artist. The moral power, really, of being an artist. Not a dry eye in the house. Okay. You're ready to lurch up and say something, aren't you, Inga?
I wanted to ask you why, I was asked so many times, why only concept art in the Sigmund Freud Museum? Because this was a clear path.
I never noticed that as being the case. It was just art. It wasn't things which were being described as art a priori, like painting and sculpture is. But some people think of, certainly Franz's work plays on sculpture, certainly Heimel's work plays on painting, but it's the project is their artists, and they use these things.
I think
it's in a different way.
Not necessarily concept art, and I think the term of concept art in the meantime has become very obscure and much wider. But I would rather say it was art which was devoted to a certain discourse, or where discourse played a strong role. Yeah. And in this context, Franz or Helmut Sobernik, as well as Ernesto Neto, play a different role than lots of other artists, which in our opinion,
it's really the art of our time, and that happens to be what it looks like. That's really the thing that one. Which explains that. When I first started doing what I wanted to do, I had to come up with a name, and it had been around, applied to other things that were something else, but I called it conceptual art. Now, that was, that was almost a kind of apology and an alibi just to be able to put it into the world and fight for it culturally. Eventually, it got to the point where other artists younger artists could do it and not have to call it anything special, And I thought, well, that's some form of I guess, a success. Bit of a warning, too, probably. Yes?
Yeah, I have a broad and vague question, but maybe I'd be interested to hear from you.
I'm a sort of broad and vague kind of guy. Go ahead.
So at the very end, you were talking about how the artwork sees itself.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how you think of art seeing either itself or the spectator, and how, when you're working with that kind of metaphor, how you what you're thinking about.
Right. The reference is to an idea is actually coming originally out of the philosophy of science, and it has to do with certain models. Anglo-American philosophical thought has, and philosophy of science being part of that, has always seen if you want to use it in iconic terms, architectonic, where it builds and it builds and it builds, but it just keeps going straight ahead. Whereas dialectical thought, here in the continent, is seeing more of a spiral. And before it can proceed, it must see itself. And that, which gives, I think, much more depth and why I jumped ship from one to the other some many years back. Though, and the great discussion, interesting one about Wittgenstein was, you know, he was a bit kidnapped by the Brits, right? And a very close friend of his, who was his engineer, who was Paul Engelman, who collaborated with Wittgenstein on the house for Sister Margaret. He said, you know, he wrote a memoir, brilliant, and he said, you know, you have to understand, they got it wrong. Imagine that you're doing the contour of an island. Well, the Brits were assuming it was a description of the landmass, but Wittgenstein was just showing where the sea ended. Same drawing, right? And that was sort of the difference between, you know, the mentality where I live now in London and here in the rest of Europe. If you want to make any sort of political implications to that in relation to British policy toward Europe, you can feel free to do that.
There's no more further question, I think.
No further question? We're going to eat, drink, and be merry.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you for your attention.
And
appreciate it.
You can see the works upstairs.
How long was it, by the way? Did you look at
15 minutes.
what?
50 minutes.
15 minutes.
50. Bingo. And Martin, you missed 3/4 of it. You